Hello, my name is Laura Graham and I'm a Senior Associate in Reddy Charlton's Employment Law Department. So today I'm going to outline some common types of contractual restrictions that can limit what an employee can do once they leave their employment. So these clauses are generally referred to as either post-termination restrictions or restrictive covenants. Employers generally like to include these clauses in a contract of employment for a more senior employee, and they can often be the most negotiated clause in a contract. The motivation for wanting these clauses is generally to protect the employer's business, and they do this by deterring employees from maybe joining competitors and taking business from their original employer, or disclosing confidential information, or preventing team moves where a more senior member of a team leaves and takes the rest of the team with them. However, a one-size-fits-all clause is unlikely to be appropriate and may not be enforceable. It is important that the restrictions are bespoke for the particular circumstances. What's appropriate, for example, for one employee may not be appropriate for another, and that could result in them being void and unenforceable as a restraint of trade. So there are four main types of clauses that are commonly included in employment contracts, which I'll go through. The first of these is a non-compete clause. Non-compete clauses generally restrict an ex-employee from joining a competitor for a defined period of time after termination. So traditionally, non-compete clauses are more difficult to enforce than a non-solicitation clause, for example. A non-compete clause is considered a very powerful weapon for employers and potentially a restraint of trade, so the courts are cautious about upholding these clauses. An employer cannot simply provide that an employee cannot join a competitor without having, a legitimate business interest that it is seeking to protect, and ensuring that that restriction on the employee is no more than is absolutely necessary to protect that interest. So a legitimate business interest may be to protect the employer's confidential information, for example. If the only way to protect that confidential information is to impose a restriction on the employee, then the restriction must be the absolute minimum necessary to protect that interest. So the factors looked at will generally be the length of the restriction, what it seeks to restrict the employee from doing, and where it restricts the employee from doing it. So the second type of clause is a non-solicitation clause. And what these do is they restrict an employee from making an approach to solicit the former employer's clients or customers. So again, these need to be limited to the absolute minimum necessary to protect the employer's business. And generally they should be limited to, say, clients or customers with whom the employee had contact for, say, a period of time, maybe a year before termination. So non-solicitation clauses, they can be difficult to enforce, as proving solicitation can be quite tricky. So when assessing what is appropriate, employers should consider how long it will take the employee's replacement to develop a relationship with the clients or customers, and therefore reduce the risk that they could damage the business. So the third type of clause is similar to a non-solicitation clause, and it's a non-dealing with clause. This goes a step further than a non-solicitation clause because it seeks to prevent a former employee from dealing with a client or a customer of the business, whether they approach them or the client approaches them. So the advantage of this clause for an employer is that the employer doesn't need to prove solicitation by the employee. However, as these clauses not only seek to restrict the behaviour of the employee but also a client or customer, the courts are quite cautious about upholding them. So the fourth type of clause is a non-poaching clause. And this type of clause is inserted where an employer wants to prevent a team move. So the legitimate interest that the employer is seeking to protect is the stability of its workforce. Again, this restriction needs to be kept to the absolute minimum necessary to protect that aim. So an employer should consider what employees may be influenced by the leaving employee and the length of time that that influence is likely to continue. So for further information on protecting your business from departing employees, please see our website. Thank you.